Okay, so session now with Naomi Nixon. She is the Vice President of Southeast Asia for Retail Decisions, or RED, R-E-D, worldwide. Naomi's going to talk through a few slides and then we're going to have a Q&A. But just to give you a bit of background, she is a specialist in payment fraud prevention. So her role is advising and assisting merchants to reduce their exposure to fraud in the e-commerce space, and that's very much why she's on the programme today. Her organisation is committed to the fight against transactional fraud, and they work with merchants and banking institutions throughout the Asia Pacific to provide fraud solutions for all payment transaction types. So I'm going to ask Naomi to present a few slides, and then we're going to do a Q&A. But would you please join me in welcoming Naomi? Okay, so we've got the PowerPoint presentation up. Just check the slides are working. I think you just click. Could we have a bit of a hand on the left and right of the slide?
There we go.
Yeah, all good?
Oh, right. Unless that was you, not me. Might just move down slightly from the last presenter, just a little bit, and obviously I should have worn heels today. Anyway, thanks everyone very much for your time. It's been particularly interesting from my perspective to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin and where it's up to with the regulations. Just a quick introduction to who we are. As Glenn said, we're a specialist provider in transactional fraud prevention. We provide solutions to both banks and other payment gateways, and also to individual merchants. So specifically what we'll be talking about is our experience in the e-commerce space. So our solutions that we provide in the e-commerce space are payment type agnostic. We don't care what form factor, what channel that they're coming from. We don't care what product is attempting to be purchased. But we do, work in consultation with those merchants to try and address the issues that they're experiencing in the e-commerce fraud environment. I don't certainly have as many stories about arresting people, knocking out hubcaps and various other stories, but I can certainly at least provide a little bit of an insight as to what fraud looks like in the global environment. So RED operates, as I said, a global e-commerce fraud prevention solution, and we have analysts based throughout the world that are actually looking at fraud trends on behalf of our customers. This is just there for everyone else, PCI, DSS. Obviously, we've got all those compliance and regulations. Just given some of the people that were attending today, I thought it was important just to flash that up for a few minutes, just to get that one out of the way. How does RED see e-commerce fraud? And also, in the Q&A session, I'm also interested in opening it up to see where perhaps people think that, that the Bitcoin area might experience issues, or where it might actually provide actually some benefits over safe trading online. So fraudsters steal a magnitude of goods online. Typically the end game is obviously to sell it and try and get some money out of it. So it's not just the physical products that we see that they're selling. We know for some of our larger merchant retailers, we know which items are more fraud prone than others. So for example, a size 10 pair of Nike shoes are more fraud prone than the other sizes. Again, we know, prepaid cards, because they're obviously very attractive to fraudsters. We see up to 3 out of every 10 transactions can tend to be fraud attempts there. Then we move into the virtual goods. So here's where we're looking at, music downloads, gaming characters, you name it, whatever fraudsters can get the hold of and commit their fraud from the comfort of the armchair in Romania or any other countries where we see a large amount of fraud. They're doing it. So what we're doing is we're also seeing a number of foreign exchange customers that are actually, we're working on strategies for them to eliminate fraud. And that also comes into play with other regulations that they have on which countries they're allowed to do business with, which regions. And I guess all of that's still, being worked out in the Bitcoin industry. But it's certainly something that we've started to see is that fraudsters are attracted to the initial purchase of the Bitcoins. So if you're a merchant that's trading online on that, you need to be aware of that and look at what measures you can put in place as a business to try and avoid doing business with fraudsters. So what we see for a lot of our merchants is that you have to be able to respond quickly to fraud. This is just an anonymised UK version of what looks like a typical fraud to us. So one of our analysts was alerted to this particular Josh Spencer that was claiming a billing address in London. That billing address also had a number of other people associated with it. Thought, you know, that's okay, maybe it's a high-rise apartment block, lots of people living there. But suddenly we looked and we saw that there was also a home phone number being claimed at that address. Looking into that further, we also saw 3 other people, you know, Jay Rice and Fiona Jones, also claiming that home phone number, but their addresses were in completely other parts of London. So when our fraud analysts looked into this further, they uncovered this. And this was in a particular merchant sector. So what we saw with these particular, they weren't just attacking one of our merchants, they were attacking multiple merchants using some of the same credentials, which enabled us to uncover this large ring that happened with only 2 weeks. So that's how quickly these attacks can occur, and you need to be able to respond quickly. So what's the pain points that we see for e-commerce business, and whether that applies to your business if you're trading on the Bitcoins? Is, you know, obviously in the payments world, you've got the financial transaction of using a credit card that might have chargeback losses and then scheme fines associated with that. Aside from that, there's other revenue losses or actually reputational damage that can occur with that. There's also, if you're trying to manually, you know, a lot of the customers that we deal with are trying to mitigate fraud by looking at each of the transactions on a manual basis. And that obviously is very time consuming and is also sometimes doesn't give you the ability to react fast enough to the transaction fraud that's occurring. So we manage e-commerce fraud on an ongoing basis with our merchants. We look at the transactions that are coming in and we'll profile them appropriately on that business. So we'll look at a large number of data elements. We'll look at the device. You know, where's that device? Have we seen that device in our ecosystem before? We have one of the largest negative consortiums of negative data, and that's around not just, you know, not just elements you'd expect with, say, you know, a card number, but also email addresses, as I said before, devices, anything that can be negative associated with fraud in the past. Because what we're certainly seeing and what we're certainly hearing, particularly in the Bitcoin environment, is that we hear from a number of merchants that they're doing the right thing. They're getting the KYC check, it's passing the KYC check. You know, as the earlier presentation, you know, went through, there's a lot of data mining that's going on. There's a lot of identities that are being stolen. There's a lot of people out there pretending to be someone else and getting away with it. So you need to make sure that you're monitoring the ability to detect that as early as possible and look at different patterns or anomalies in you know, what you'd normally see as a standard transaction, just to try and improve the effectiveness of your fraud management, and also, again, trying to make your brand a safer one for people to deal with. So, you know, I guess just going from that point, I'll, you know, just give you a brief overview. These are just some of the elements that we look at when we're reviewing transactions. So it's obviously a full-time job for us, but the part of it is to actually automate it. We provide a real-time decision to our customers as to whether to accept, challenge or deny those transactions based on the profile that we build with our individual customers. So I really want to open this up to more of a discussion, but you know, to control fraud and to look at this, you really do need to, particularly in such a growing industry, need to look at real-time fraud prevention. And there are different risk strategies that you need to put in place for your business to enable you to make sure that you're accepting transactions from, you know, from valid customers and not just dealing with fraudsters. You'd be actually surprised at the number of you know, businesses in the market. They might have very large businesses, but some of them actually become just a fraud channel there might be one product that they're selling. The sales guy's going, great, look at all the sales we've got. Someone in the rest of the organisation is saying, but they're all just fraud. So whilst one person is happy because he's not getting the fraud stats associated with that, the other guys are obviously saying from a governance perspective, you want to make sure that you are doing the right thing. So,
excellent.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Does your software platform, does it work on sort of annual license fees? Can you tell us about how you price for your services?
Yeah, sure. So it's basically an initial setup and then an ongoing transaction fee. That transaction fee we include things like ongoing consultancy because fraud trends and patterns change, and our analysts review that on a regular basis to make sure that the right rules are in place for the businesses.
Right. And have Bitcoin or any digital currency companies or wallets been working with you?
Yeah, so we've been working with a few throughout the world, and I guess what sort of dawned on us locally is that the challenges that we see with other merchants that are doing the KYC checks but are still getting targeted with fraud, we're seeing a lot of the same sort of patterns turn up. Right. So I guess that was something that particularly interested us, especially because the Bitcoin has always been associated with us with such a secure way of paying, but I guess it's obtaining that original Bitcoin itself that's causing the issues.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Do we have any questions, please, for Naomi on anything really as towards whether it's monitoring or instances of fraud? Yes, please.
Hi, Daniel from Hit Squad here. Yeah, I just wanted to ask. You'd probably be aware on the Bitcoin side of things that the seller has very little risk of fraud. It's the buyer that seems to take a lot of the risk. And I was just wondering if companies like yours are looking at perhaps the reverse side of things of how to protect the buyer in these sorts of transactions.
So can you expand a bit more on the scenario on the buyer? Because what we've seen is we've actually seen a number of sellers actually putting in place I guess solutions to try and combat people using fraudulent details to obtain that Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, however they got that Bitcoin, once they transfer it to the seller owns it and will own it forever. So to some extent, the seller is not going to be as concerned as they would otherwise be about where that came from. It's irrevocable. So unlike Visa or something like that, where after 60 days or something, the transaction could still be reversed. So it seems to sort of change the onus of security a little bit.
I guess, to be honest, I just don't quite understand the complexities around that. But I mean, pretty much how we work with each of our customers is on that, that customised model to make sure it is more of a secure environment. We don't really, we don't get into a liability argument because really at the end of the day, it's about stopping fraud, not about who's liable one person over the other. It's about, making sure that you're going through the right checks and balances. But I would be interested in having a bit further of a chat to you about that and about what you see to see how the solutions can be customised to that. Because I mean, certainly, it's a real-time rules engine with multiple checks. So there's definitely the flexibility in there to do that.
Thank you for that. We have another question over here.
Hi. Ruben Brahmanathan from Adroit Lawyers. So with the Bitcoin network, because it is a decentralised sort of consensus network and everyone can see every transaction, in order for it to really operate effectively, it needs to be private enough that individual users can't really see what other people are doing, and it needs to be open enough that law enforcement and fraud prevention can. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges. And I just had a question around that because there are a number of services that are seeking to protect individual users' privacy on the Bitcoin network, obviously at the expense of openness of the network to services like fraud prevention. So that's the first question: is do you see, or can you expand on some of the challenges from that perspective? And secondly, the risk of fraud prevention and law enforcement having enough access and having that access or having that information leaked. So I guess there's two sides to that question.
So to try and address the first question and also introduce my colleague Gary Kemper, who's sitting there quite pert, feel free to chime in on any of that. But to address the first part, I mean, our solution has been in place for a very long time, acting anonymously behind the scenes, and you wouldn't know that it's there. It's not, it's not like the KYC check. It can sit behind it, but it's not looking at the personal data elements associated with that. It's more profiling the transaction and looking at from that aspect. So I don't know whether that answers your first question. And then on the second question, that is obviously something that is, I guess it's also still to the first point, is what we've been in place for a long time. We've been dealing with merchants globally for a long time, and in some markets we do get more traction with, the law enforcement. In some it's less. Really, at the end of the day, our focus is on stopping that actual, the fraudulent transactions from coming through where we can. So, it's using sort of, the data isn't aggregated and profiled as in we will, I'm going to go back and make sure that you can't do any transactions online. It's more disaggregated data, just looking at the individual elements and the behaviour as a whole to see whether that actually, that profile fits your regular customer spend or not.
Okay, did you want to add anything to those questions? You're good? Okay. Well, look, Naomi, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking Naomi Nixon?